The train began to move past the station and the line of waiting taxis and horse-drawn carriages. "Well, we're off," announced Bob, a little too heartily. He motioned to the hovering porter and ordered some beer to celebrate our departure. "Maybe we'll have some rain before we get to Diwania." He stood up to peer out of the window. I looked out too, expecting what? A friend to wave goodbye? 3 months ago I had come to Baghdad as a bride, and the city had seemed strange and alien to me then, a place so far removed from my experience that I had nothing with which to compare it. Now, headed for an unknown tribal village, I did not want to miss my last glimpse of Baghdad, which seemed a dear, familiar place. Clouds hung low and dark in the bit of sky I could see between the buildings and the townspeople and tribesmen, carriages, cars, and donkey carts that moved more and more quickly past the train window. The winter night was coming fast, and as we left the Tigris River behind, the lights were on in all the hotels along its banks, the Semiramis, the Zia, the Sindibad. We passed rows of mud and mat Sarifa huts with kerosene lanterns flickering in their doorways, a series of smoking brick kilns, a mosque with a lighted minaret, more Sarifa huts, and then there was nothing to see but the dark horizon and a few date palms and the wide, empty plain. "Aren't you excited?" asked Bob. "I can't understand you at all. Here we've been waiting and planning all these weeks for you to come down, dear, and now that we're on our way at last, you sit there as calmly as though you were going shopping or something." At least I looked calm, I thought. That's good. "Yes," I brought out, "I am excited." We sipped our beer. "And also scared," I added to myself. I had to get along well in El Nahra, so I could help Bob with his work. But would I be able to? Bob had warned that we could certainly expect the women to be friendly at first, in the customary hospitable Arab way, but he couldn't be sure how they would react after the initial period. In the dining car, I was the only woman, and the men stared at me curiously. We went back to our compartment and watched the dark landscape while the train pushed slowly south. I had thought, and Bob had agreed, that the women might accept me more readily if I met them on their own terms. Thus, although I had balked at wearing an all-enveloping black abaya, I had elected to live like the women of El Nahra, in relative seclusion behind walls, not meeting or mixing with men. But what if, in spite of my efforts, the women shunned me and left me to myself, more of a hindrance than an asset to my husband? 2 years alone in a mud house, I reflected, hardly an enchanting way to spend a honeymoon. The weather was certainly not welcoming. A midnight rain in Diwania poured down as we ran from the train to the waiting room with its single wooden bench. I sat by the luggage while Bob looked for a taxi or a carriage to take us to the government rest house. Even if the weather had been ideal, we could not have continued on to El Nahra that night. The village lay only 10 miles southeast, but there was no regular transportation except for occasional trucks and taxis which did not travel after dark. While I waited, people gathered to stare at me again, and I slowly became aware that, among the crowds of middle-class Iraqis and townspeople, I was the only woman without an abaya. I began to be self-conscious. "This is ridiculous," I told myself. "Why should I have to wear that ugly thing? It's not my custom." The arguments with Bob about the abaya returned in a rush. Bob said I ought to wear it, since everyone else did. Since we were guests of the Sheik, he added, it would make everything easier if I wore the abaya. The Sheik wouldn't have to punish people for insulting me. Insulting me? I had been indignant. "They say an uncovered woman is an immoral woman," Bob had explained, and the tribesmen ask why a woman would want to show herself to anyone but her husband. I remembered my furious reply. "If they can't take me as I am, if we have to make artificial gestures to prove we are human beings too, what's the point?" Now, although I hated to admit it, my principles were weakening before my embarrassment as more and more people gathered to whisper and
To keep listening to this audiobook, I've left you a link in the description so you can do it, at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.